Good morning. Welcome to the Emily Costo podcast YouTube channel. We're going to be talking about my next step in living the good life and having optimal health, wealth, love, and happiness, and understanding social situations and really making the most out of life. And this particular one is all about enjoyment and happiness. And it means a lot to me because I think oftentimes it's overlooked. And people are okay with making certain sacrifices. But at the same time, this is all about having perspective. There are people on their deathbed that say that they made too many sacrifices in life and that they wish they lived more. They wish they traveled when they were 20 instead of 70. They wish that they bought that sports car at 30 instead of 60. So we'll talk about that. If you are not already watching the live stream on YouTube, make sure you join on YouTube because that's where we're going to be talking right now. Okay, so we're talking about readjusting the pace of success and the Dutch Big Gulp. There's a Dutch saying, and I love Dutch people. I want to tell a story first. So I used to date a guy that was 100% Dutch. He was 6'6", 240 pounds. He was my big ex. We dated in middle school, high school, and college for about 6.5 years on and off. And definitely a heartbreaking experience when we broke up. But I learned a lot from that experience, specifically because his family founded one of the biggest tire manufacturers in the world. And his grandparents had $500 million to their name. So he drove around in very luxurious vehicles, and they had a very interesting perspective of life, especially considering that they came from money. But there's a Dutch saying that the grandparents would say, and it was, "We're too soon old and too late smart." And what that means for me is that there are a lot of people who do well and don't live with regrets, but it all comes down to the pace of learning. I see G. Hi, G. Hi, G. If you aren't watching the live stream on YouTube, please do that. That's where there's sound. So the factor that I think is really important that people misweight is patience. And if you're doing all the things correctly, like you can know the right things, but you may not be taking the correct action. But if you're taking action on things, then things will come to you. And that is just a case of perspective. But when it comes down to the pace of learning, you have to think of PI versus IP. So most people are PI, or IP. Sorry, most people are IP, which is impatiently patient. PI. It was PI. Most people are patiently impatient, which basically means, let's say hypothetically, you have a goal of becoming a multimillionaire, and you want to be a multimillionaire in 10 years from now. What are you doing today? Are you patient today, but impatient with the end goal? Are you making haste quickly? Or are you the reversed, which is IP, impatiently patient? And impatiently patient people are impatient today, but they're patient with being a multimillionaire. And that right there is a matter of perspective. So you have to make haste quickly. In your fears, you act like mortals. And in your desires, you act like immortals. Steve Jobs said that he didn't want to be the richest man in the graveyard. And the problem I see with this is there's people that are too old when they finally make it. It's like you're never going to quite make it. And even if you do, you'll be 80 years old. So how on earth are you going to enjoy it? You'll eventually figure out money, but you'll be too old to enjoy it. It's like if you go to a really nice restaurant or golf club or something, and there's an 80-year-old man pulling up to the finest restaurant in the city in a Ferrari. And before he hops out of the car, the walker comes first. So he pulls the walker out and then shuffles out of his vehicle to go sit down at a nice restaurant. You need to get what you want impatiently. And a lot of people might be wondering, what does this have to do with big gulps? It's because the goal is to train your throat to open up versus sipping. And that's a Dutch concept. Learn to gulp. You don't want to be eventually wealthy. And there's a time to chug and there's a time to throttle. So you need to know when you have to slow it down. But it's basically all about just making the most out of life. Really enjoying experiences as they come. Sitting back, like I say, don't be in the business, be on the business. You have to do the same thing in life. It's not just a business principle, but you need to be on top of the current circumstance and enjoying it from an outside perspective. It's like when people say, what do they say? They say, just sit back and like actually appreciate this thing. There's another word for it. Hi, Louie. Hi, Bearded Issues. Is that Barners? Will. I'm glad you like it. So that's what's important, is to have an outside perspective and take moments. And it's like psychological time being different than chronological time. Your time will be a lot longer if you understand it psychologically. And we'll go back and cover that concept again, or you can watch that concept again. But your psychological time is a frame of reference, which basically means if you're spending time with loved ones, that's why it's passing so quickly. It's because you're enjoying it. Versus if you're watching a clock, every minute goes by very slowly. Use the gulping to jumpstart you in life. Don't tell me your 10-year goals. Tell me your 10-minute goals. So what's the point of 10-year goals if you don't do the 10-minute goals correctly? So it's not only in terms of enjoyment. Also, I'm reading a book called Happiness is a Serious Problem by Dennis Prager, and he talks about how fun does not equal happiness. So it's not necessarily the fun things that make you happy. The fun things are fun. And you have to have appreciation for both. The things that make you genuinely happy and the things that are just sheer enjoyment that is fleeting. So the world has changed, and this is a question for your grandparents, not you. Because the 10,000-year-old mind, the black and white mentality that people's grandparents had, it doesn't work anymore in the world we live in. And luckily, we're trained a little bit to enjoy, to take the gulping mentality. That's like the really big difference between, we talk about all these different generations. We talk about Gen Z, Gen X, and it's really all about mentality when it comes to the gulping mentality. Gulping versus throttling. Somebody lives in the Great Depression. We don't live in the Great Depression, right? So we can learn all we want from history books, but finances are emotional. They're not logical. So if you lived during that time period, you would have a very different outlook on the stock market. Or if you lived through the 08-09 recession, you would have a very different outlook on the real estate market, because emotionally you're connected to a certain feeling because you experienced something. So be quick to start. We talk about how much information do you need to start. There's two trains of thought. One is people are, they start very quickly and they do things quickly, but it's messy. And then the second person is the engineer mind that will spend 10 years trying to make sure they know every single thing about a problem before even beginning to solve it. So you should have, I always say the magic number is 40 to 70% of the information, depending on the thing you're trying to do, between 40 and 70% of all the data and information to just do it. And then that's when you should start. So don't be messy and quick, but also don't be an engineer mind. So you have to figure out how to change. And since you're hardwired to be a perfectionist or to be a sloppy, fast person, you're one or the other in most circumstances. Take 5% incremental changes in the opposite direction. You'll have to look back on the years of struggle as some of the most beautiful years. Everybody does. Like, I look back on my college days, and like a lot of people when I was in college, they talked about their college years being some of the most beautiful years of their life because it was easy, because they didn't have a job yet. And now looking back on my college years, it was some of the toughest years of my life. It was not easier than having a normal job. So I was taking 21 units and I started when I was 15. That was a little bit different. And I was focused on graduating valedictorian or magna cum laude or something. And I put a lot of pressure on myself. So my college years were not easy, but I appreciate them and I look back on them as some of the most beautiful years. In life, you have to go through seasons. You have to ratchet your way to success. People don't start out at 18 years old most of the time making six-figure incomes or higher incomes than people at 50. That just doesn't happen. You might start with a scarcity mindset, making under $70,000 a year, and you can stay there for a few years, and then you can move into financial independence, which is $70,000 to $150,000 a year. And then you'll eventually move into prosperity, which is $150,000 to $1 million. And a lot of people are happy just being in the financial independence stage. But if somebody wants to be in the prosperity stage, they can make some sacrifices and get there. And then if you want to be in the wealth accumulation stage, which is over $1 million a year, you can get there. You just need to know all of these principles that I'm teaching and apply them. The acquisition of knowledge is easy, but the application is tough. You cannot change overnight in the sense that, you can start right away as to not create the habit of constantly putting things off. But the world will eventually catch on if you're doing the right things. But the key word there is eventually. It doesn't happen immediately. Do not be eternally in a New Year's resolution, or don't be an eternal New Year's resolution person. There are people out there that have huge goals and they're not doing anything today. That is the absolute definition of somebody that is impatiently patient, or patiently impatient. Sorry. It's hard to think about. But most people's New Year's resolutions last about a week. We're nearing the end of the year, got a couple more months left. Most people's New Year's resolutions, when they say they're going to work out in a gym or whatever their silly New Year's resolution is, it usually lasts about a week. That's the average. So you need to find a fast pace of success that is both able to be, it's easy enough to be consistent, but also hard enough to where it's challenging. You need to move with momentum and start the road trip immediately. If it's a road trip, start it immediately. You're already late. The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but today is a pretty great day as well. And make haste quickly. Gee, let's get it. Yes. All right. Questions are, what is an example where you were patiently impatient? You had a far out goal where you were impatient when you got to it. What is an example where you were impatiently patient, IP, the inverse? You did it right away. And something to think about is there a tragedy in somebody getting to where you are faster? Is there a tragedy in other people making money faster than you? I'm the ninth child in my family. I have 8 older siblings and 1 younger sibling. I was born decades before my older siblings, or some of them, right? And I always felt like life was a journey of catching up. I was born really a generation before my siblings, but I was born decades before my oldest siblings. And I compare myself to them. Is there really a tragedy? And I love having siblings. This is something, if you're an only child, I feel sorry for you, because the coolest thing about siblings, and this is like a rabbit trail, but the coolest thing about having siblings is the fact that when parents have kids, like multiple kids, there's automatic competition. You learn to be in a competition just naturally because there's limited resources, and that is so healthy for development. So that's one of the best things about having siblings. But I was in competition with my siblings my whole life. Even though I originally was very quiet and introverted, I had to figure out how to find my own feet. But very competitive. And so when I was 18, 19, 20 years old, I would compare the amount of money I had saved to the amount of money that my older brother had saved that was 15 years older than me and had already had a 15-year-old business that was very successful. So I had to think about a lot of different things. And it made me work a little bit harder, but I made more sacrifices, and maybe I wasn't gulping up the enjoyment aspect of life. Sorry for that tangent. But my last question is, what is something you have been holding back on? And those are the questions today. So if you enjoyed this particular topic, make sure to turn on your notifications and subscribe. And I will be back on Monday after the weekend with the next step in living the good life. We're going to talk about the $495,000 Honda Accord, which is very interesting. And if you have any ideas of concepts that I can cover in the future, please let me know. We're definitely going to talk a little bit about happiness and mental health after I finish all of the steps in living the good life. But make sure you request topics if you have any ideas. Thank you for joining. I will see everybody later.